Good morning. We will do Chapter 6, The Challenge of Globalization. We will start with slide number 2. Key learning objectives. Defining globalization and classifying the major ways in which companies enter the global marketplace, recognizing the major drivers of the globalization process, and the international financial and trade institutions that have shaped this process in recent decades. Analyzing the benefits and costs of the globalization of business, identifying the major types of political and economic systems in which companies operate across the world, and the special challenges posed by doing business in diverse settings. Assessing how businesses can work collaboratively with governments and the civil sector to address global social issues. Slide 3, the process of globalization, refers to the increasing movement of goods, services, and capital across national borders. Is considered a process and ongoing series of interrelated events. International trade and financial flows integrate the world economy, leading to the spread of technology, culture, and politics. Globalization is not simply a trend or a fad, but rather an international system. Slide 4. Entering and competing in the global marketplace. Develop global market channels. First, build a successful business in their home country, then export products or services to buyers in other countries. Establish global operations. Locate manufacturing plants or service operations in other countries as a way to cut costs, otherwise known as outsourcing. Develop global supply chains. Purchase raw materials, components, or other supplies from sellers in other countries. Work may also be subcontracted. We now move on to slide number 5. Major transactional corporations, TNCs, defined by the United Nations as firms that control assets abroad. 104,000 TNCs operate in the modern global economy. They in turn have 9 times that number of affiliates, suppliers, subcontractors, and other entities with which they have some business relationship. Most global commerce is carried out by a small number of powerful firms. The next slide lists top 10 non-financial transactional corporations ranked in order of the value and the foreign assets they control. You could look at the next slide, which is 6.6, figure 6.1, the world's top 10 non-financial transaction corporations. Although this is dated, some of these definitely are still around in the top 10. Slide number 7, foreign direct investment. Another important aspect of globalization is the worldwide flow of capital. Foreign direct investment occurs when a company, individual, or fund invests money in another country, for example, by buying shares of stock in or loaning money to a foreign firm. In 2010, for example, FDI was 1.24 trillion, and we can just imagine what it is today in 2019. Slide 6.8, the acceleration of globalization. The world's economy is becoming increasingly integrated. Higher share of output is being exported across national borders. 1/5 of all goods and services produced worldwide is sold to other nations rather than domestically. This is almost double the percentage of 1960. In earlier years, most exports were of goods. An important recent trend is the globalization of services such as travel, insurance, financial, and information services. Slide number 9. The acceleration of globalization, driven by several factors. Technological innovation, easier to communicate with employees, partners, and suppliers all over the globe in real time. Transportation systems. Improvements enables the fast and cheap movement of goods and services from one place to another. The rise of major transnational corporations. Bigger, well-capitalized firms are better equipped to conduct business across national boundaries than smaller firms. Social and political reform. Rise of Pacific Rim growth economies, collapse of communism in Central and Eastern Europe have opened new regions to world trade. Slide number 10. International financial and trade institutions. 3 institutions that set the rules by which international commerce is transacted. We are talking about the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization. The World Bank is otherwise known as WB, International Monetary Fund is known as IMF, and World Trade Organization is known as the WTO. No business can operate across national boundaries without complying with the rules set by the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Many businesses in developing countries are dependent on the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. We move on to slide number 11. The World Bank, established in 1944, provides economic development loans to its member nations. Funds used mainly for roads, dams, power plants, pipelines, and other infrastructure projects. Funding provided by member countries and international capital markets. Negotiates structural adjustment plans with countries it loans to. Applies conditions on these countries, and conditions are considered by critics to lead to unfair burden on developing countries that can't afford them. Slide 12. International Monetary Fund, sister organization to the World Bank, created at the same time. Purpose is to make currency exchange easier for member countries so that they can participate in global trade. Lends foreign exchange to member countries. Imposes conditions on governments that receive its loans. Has begun to offer debt relief to some nations, which is very helpful to the world economy at large. Slide 13. World Trade Organization, founded in 1995, successor to General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, otherwise known as GATT, international body that establishes the ground rules for trade among nations. Its major objectives is to promote free trade, attempts to eliminate barriers to trade, for example, quotas, duties, and tariffs, conducts rounds of negotiations on various topics. Most favored nation rule means member countries cannot discriminate against foreign products for any reason. Slide 14, the benefits and costs of globalization. Globalization is highly controversial. Clearly, some benefit from globalization while others do not. What are some of the major arguments advanced by both sides in the debate over this important issue? Slide 15, benefits of globalization. Increase economic productivity. The cost of globalization causes job insecurity. It reduces prices for consumers. However, the cost of globalization, it weakens environmental and labor standards. Gives developing countries access to foreign investment funds to support economic development. The cost of globalization prevents individual nations from adopting policies promoting environmental or social objectives if these discriminate against products from other countries. Transfer technology, another benefit of globalization. Cost, erodes regional and national cultures, undermines cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity, which is not acceptable. Benefits of globalization, spreads democracy and freedom and reduces military conflict. Cost of globalization is compatible with despotism. Slide number 16. Comparative political and economic systems. Nations differ greatly in their political, social, and economic systems. First important dimension to consider is how power is exercised and the degree of democratic rights within that country. Past century has been marked by spread of democratic rights to many nations for the first time in history. Slide 17. Comparative political systems. Democracy, the presence of political freedom. 4 defining features of democracy are defined according to the UN. Number 1, fair elections. An independent media, not a state-owned media like North Korea. Separation of powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, such as our own. An open society where citizens have the right to form their own independent organizations to pursue social, religious, and cultural goals. Slide 18. Comparative political systems. Military dictatorships. Repressive regimes ruled by dictators who exercise total power through the control of the armed forces, such as North Korea. Rights of citizens to organize for cultural or religious freedom is restricted in others, for example, Iran and Saudi Arabia. According to the United Nations, 106 countries still limit important civil and political freedoms. Slide number 19. Comparative political systems. The degree to which human rights are protected differs greatly among nations. Several international codes of human rights exist. Most important one is the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. Over half of the world's nations have adopted these human rights covenants and standards. Still, many violations of human rights still occur. Sudan, Rwanda, systems where minority groups and indigenous peoples lack basic human rights. Example, Nepal. Slide 20. Comparative economic systems. Free enterprise system. Based on the principle of voluntary association and exchange, members of society satisfy most of their economic needs through voluntary market transactions. Central state control. Economic power is concentrated in the hands of government officials and political authorities. The central government owns the property that is used to produce goods and services. Slide 21. Challenges of global diversity. Diversity and complexity of systems that transactional corporations face creates challenges. If a company does business in a nation that does not grant women equal rights, should that company hire and promote women at work, even if it violates local laws and customs? You could discuss that as one of your discussion questions. Should a company enter into a business venture with a government-owned enterprise if that government has a reputation for violating its citizens' human rights? Slide 22. Meeting the challenges of global diversity. Notion of constructive engagement. By operating with strong moral principles, transnational corporations can be a force for positive change in nations where they operate. In some circumstances, this is not possible due to extreme conditions provoking dilemma. At which point do violations of political, human, and economic rights become so extreme that a company cannot morally justify doing business in that country? Only a company can answer that question. Slide number 23. Collaborative partnerships for global problem solving. Emerging trend for development of collaborative, multi-sector partnerships focused on particular social issues or problems in the global economy. These 4 partnerships have been termed Global Action Networks, or GANs, involves 3 sectors: business, government, civil society. Unique capabilities of each sector is presented on the following slide. Slide number 24. 6.3. The distinctive attributes of 3 major sectors. We'll look at some examples. Organizational form. For the business, it's for-profit. For government, it's governmental. And for civil society, it's nonprofit. Goods purchased. And for business, private. Government, it's public. And civil society, it's group. Resources. On the business end, capital assets, technical knowledge, production skills. Government, tax revenue, policy knowledge, regulatory and enforcement power, and on civil society, community knowledge, inspirational leadership. You can read the rest of this slide on your own. Thank you. Have a great day.